I handed over the paperwork, my fingers gripping the folder so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The clerk barely looked up as she took it from me, flipping through the pages like it was just another routine task. For her, it probably was. For me, this was the moment everything changed. I wasn't just changing my name, I was erasing the version of me that had never truly existed. The name my mother had given me, the name that belonged to someone else long before I was even born. I had grown up wearing a ghost's identity like a second skin. It wasn't mine, but it was forced onto me, stitched into my life so seamlessly that for years, I didn't even question it. I was named after a dead girl, my mother's first daughter, the one she lost before I was born. I wasn't supposed to exist. She had planned to stop at Angelique, but then fate had different ideas and I came along. Instead of giving me a fresh start, she gave me hers, the same initials. A name that was celebrated on the same date as my sister's birthday. A reminder, a replacement. I only found out when I was 14. My mother had told the story so casually, like she was talking about the weather. Did you know you were meant to be my last baby? But then I lost Angelique, and a couple of years later, you arrived, like a second chance. She had smiled, expecting me to smile back as if I should be grateful for the scraps of life I had been given. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Every cruel joke my father made about how they were supposed to have an angel but got the devil instead. Every time my mother looked at me with sad eyes like she was searching for something I could never give her. It all made sense. Now, standing in that government office, I was finally reclaiming something that had been stolen from me before I was even old enough to understand. My own name, Nova. It was mine. It didn't belong to a sister I never met. It wasn't a tribute to a past my mother refused to let go of. It was just me. As the clerk stamped the documents and handed me back the receipt, my phone buzzed. Mom. The name flashed on my screen, and for a split second I hesitated. I already knew why she was calling. She must have seen the notification from the system. Maybe she was checking the mailbox and found the letter. Either way, she knew. I stepped outside into the cold air before answering. Mom. What the hell is this? Her voice was sharp, cutting through the small distance between us like a blade. A legal name change? What kind of sick joke is this? I exhaled slowly, gripping the phone tighter. It's not a joke. You're throwing away your name like it means nothing, like your family means nothing. That familiar, suffocating guilt crept in, wrapping around my throat like a noose, but I forced myself to push past it. I'm not throwing anything away, I'm taking back what's mine. There was silence on the other end, then a shaky breath. You really hate me that much, don't you? I closed my eyes. This isn't about you. Of course it is. I gave you that name. That was my daughter's name. I am your daughter too, I said, my voice steady. And I'm tired of living in her shadow. A bitter laugh. So what now? You think changing your name erases her? You think it erases us? No, I whispered, but maybe it finally makes me real. Another silence, this one heavier. Your father's going to lose his mind when he hears about this, she finally said. I swallowed hard. I had no doubt about that. My father had always made it clear what he thought of me. I could already hear the anger in his voice, the disgust, the way he would look at me like I was a mistake that just wouldn't go away. I'll deal with him, I said, my jaw tightening. No, you won't, she snapped, because you're coming home right now. We're going to talk about this properly. No, I said, more firmly this time. We're not. Her breathing turned ragged like she was holding back tears, or maybe rage. If you do this, don't expect to be welcomed back into this house. You understand me? A few months ago, that would have broken me. But now I just felt lighter. Then I guess this is goodbye. I hung up before she could say anything else. The sky above me was gray, heavy with a threat of rain. But as I stood there, letting the weight of the moment settle over me, I realized something. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a replacement. I didn't feel like a mistake. I felt like Nova. I sat on the bus, my phone still clutched in my hand, my mother's last words echoing in my head. If you do this, don't expect to be welcomed back into this house. I had expected anger. I had expected her to lash out, to guilt trip me, to cry. But hearing her actually say it, hearing her make it real, was something else entirely. The moment I hung up, my chest had felt hollow, like a door had slammed shut inside me when I wasn't sure would ever open again. But wasn't this what I wanted, to be free of them? The city blurred past me as the bus rattled along, the rain finally starting to fall in thin, quiet sheets. I was headed to my friend Leah's place where I'd be staying for a few nights, at least that was the plan. I wasn't sure what came after that. All I knew was that I couldn't go home, maybe ever. I tried not to let myself dwell on that part too much. When I got to Leah, she was already waiting at the door, arms crossed, her expression tight with concern. "Jesus, Nova, you look like you just crawled out of a war zone." I let out something between a laugh and a sigh, stepping inside. "I feel like it." She closed the door behind me, watching as I toed off my shoes. "Your mom called me, by the way." "Twice." I froze. What did she say? Didn't pick up, but she left a voicemail. Something about you making a horrible mistake and how I should convince you to come home before you ruin your life permanently. Leah rolled her eyes. I deleted it. A sharp, grateful exhale left me. Thanks. Leah led me to the couch, plopping down next to me. So this is really happening, huh? Nova, officially? No more? I cut her off with a look and she raised her hands in surrender. All right, Nova it is. I sank back into the cushions, the exhaustion finally catching up to me. Yeah, it's happening. For the first time in a long time, I had done something for myself. Not for my mother, not to keep the peace, not to avoid another fight, just for me. And yet, beneath the relief, beneath the sense of quiet victory, was something heavier. The knowledge that this wasn't over. The next morning, the reality of that hit fast. I woke up to my phone vibrating on the nightstand. I groggily reached for it, my stomach twisting when I saw my father's name on the screen. I hesitated for half a second before answering. Hello? There was a beat of silence, then his voice, cold and clipped. What the hell do you think you're doing? I swallowed, forcing myself to stay steady. I'm changing my name. You're throwing a tantrum. I gritted my teeth. I'm not a child. No, because you're sure acting like one, running away from home, disrespecting your mother, erasing the name we gave you like it's garbage. I clenched my fist so hard my nails dug into my palm. That name was never mine to begin with. He let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Oh, spare me the dramatics. You think calling yourself something else changes anything? You'll always be who you are, no matter what name you slap on yourself. And do you know who that is? A disappointment, a selfish, ungrateful little. I hung up. I sat there, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. The worst part wasn't what he said. The worst part was how easy it was to believe him. I barely noticed Leah coming into the room until she sat down beside me, nudging my shoulder. You good? I exhaled through my nose. My dad just called. She made a face. Yeah, I figured from the way you're gripping that phone like you want to snap it in half. I forced myself to relax my fingers. He basically told me I'm a selfish disappointment who's throwing a tantrum. Leah scoffed. Oh, classic. Love that for you. I rubbed a hand over my face. The worst part is, I feel like he's right. No, Leah said, voice firm. He's not. He's just mad he can't control you anymore. I wanted to believe that. Really, I did. But doubt had already started creeping in, poisoning the edges of my resolve. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I tried to focus on anything but the gnawing anxiety in my chest, but it was impossible. By the time night rolled around, I was restless, pacing Leah's tiny living room. You know, she said from her spot on the couch. You don't have to talk to them if you don't want to. I stopped pacing, glancing at her. What? She shrugged. You don't owe them anything, not a response, not an explanation, nothing. That was easier said than done. No matter how much I wanted to cut them off, they were still my parents. My entire life had been shaped by them. Even if I walked away, their voices still echoed inside my head, telling me I was wrong, selfish, ungrateful. But wasn't that the point of this? To take back my life? I sat down across from Leah, my mind racing. If I ignore them, they'll just get worse. My mom will cry, my dad will get angrier, and they'll find a way to make me feel like I've destroyed the family. Leah studied me for a moment. But have you? I hesitated. What destroyed the family? She said simply. Or are they just mad because they don't get to control you anymore? I opened my mouth, then closed it. The answer should have been obvious. But after years of being manipulated into feeling like the villain, it was hard to see the truth. I glanced down at my phone. More missed calls, more messages I didn't want to read. I could already picture my mother's heartbreak, my father's fury. I could hear them telling me I was selfish, telling me I was betraying them, telling me I wasn't enough. But Leah was right. I didn't owe them anything. I picked up my phone, blocked both their numbers, and set it down. Leah grinned. Proud of you, Nova. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. The silence was strange. After blocking my parents' numbers, I had expected some kind of immediate fallout. Maybe they'd show up at Leah's door, maybe they'd find another way to get to me, maybe I'd wake up to an inbox full of messages from relatives demanding I explain myself. But for the first few days, there was nothing. Just a quiet, empty void where their constant pressure used to be. It should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the wind to push me over. I tried to settle into some kind of normalcy at Leah's. She made it easy, acting like nothing had changed, like I wasn't in the middle of a full-blown identity crisis. We watched bad reality TV, ordered cheap takeout, and talked about things that had nothing to do with my family. But even when I was laughing with her, a part of me was always bracing for impact. It came on the fourth day. I had just gotten back from a short walk, trying to clear my head, when I saw the car parked outside Leah's building. My mother's car. My stomach twisted into knots. I didn't even have to see her face to know what was coming. I debated turning around, walking in the opposite direction, pretending I had somewhere else to be, but it was too late. As soon as I hesitated, the driver's side door opened, and my mother stepped out. She looked exhausted. Her hair was unbrushed, her clothes slightly wrinkled, as if she had been sitting in that car for hours. Maybe she had. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then she took a deep breath and walked toward me. Nova. She said it like a test, like she was waiting for me to flinch. I didn't. Mom, I said, keeping my voice even. She reached out, as if she wanted to touch my arm, but stopped herself. We need to talk. I glanced at the building. Leah was inside. If I screamed, she'd come running. My mother wouldn't try anything here. She just wanted to talk. Still, I felt like prey that had just been cornered. I folded my arms. I don't think we do. Her face crumpled like I had slapped her. You don't mean that. I did, but I didn't have the energy to argue, so I just stood there, staring at her, waiting. She took another shaky breath. Your father is furious. Of course he was. He thinks you're being reckless. They're throwing away your identity for, she stopped herself, for no reason. I clenched my jaw. It's not for no reason. She nodded quickly, like she wanted to seem understanding, like she was pretending to listen. Okay, then tell me the reason. I exhaled sharply. You know the reason. You've always known the reason. I never had my own name. You gave me hers. You never even gave me a chance to be my own person. Her lip trembled. That's not true. It is. You even picked my name day to match hers. She shook her head. It was supposed to be a way to honor her. It was a way to make sure I could never escape her. Tears welled in her eyes, and she wiped them away quickly. That's not fair. Nova, you keep calling me that, but you still don't accept it, I said quietly. She flinched. I just don't understand why you hate me so much. I ran a hand through my hair, frustration burning through me. This isn't about hate, it's about me finally taking something for myself. I can't live in her shadow anymore. You were never in her shadow. I let out a bitter laugh. Then why did Dad always look at me like I was a mistake? Why did he always say I was supposed to be an angel, but turned out to be the devil? She pressed her lips together like she was physically trying to hold back words she didn't want to say. I can't go back, I said, softer this time. I don't want to. She swallowed hard. Then just come with me for a little while. Let's go home, just for one night, please. We can talk properly. A deep, gut-wrenching instinct screamed no. I knew what this was, a trap, a way to get me back under their roof, under their control. If I walked through that door again, I wouldn't leave. They'd wear me down, drag me back into their world, convince me I was wrong. I'm not going back, I said. Her face hardened. The pleading look melted away, replaced by something colder, something sharp. Then at least have the decency to talk to your father. The words sent a chill through me. I hesitated. That was the opening she needed. She pulled out her phone, dialed a number, and before I could protest, she held it out to me. Just talk to him. I didn't take the phone. Her eyes darkened. If you don't, he's going to show up here himself. I didn't doubt it. If I didn't talk to him now, he'd drag me home himself. I took the phone. There was a pause, then my father's voice came through, sharp and unyielding. Are you done with this little game yet? I squeezed my eyes shut. It's not a game. You embarrassed your mother. You humiliated this family. For what, some ridiculous teenage rebellion? I forced myself to stay calm. I'm not a teenager. You're acting like one. His voice was growing angrier, louder. You think the world gives a damn about your name? You think anyone cares? You're still the same useless, ungrateful. I hung up. I handed the phone back to my mother. I'm done. She stared at me, breathing heavily. Then, without another word, she turned and walked back to her car. I watched her drive away. When I went back inside, Leah was waiting. That bad? I let out a slow breath. Could have been worse? She frowned. Nova. I mean it. I swallowed. They know where I stand now. They know I'm not coming back. She studied me for a second, then nodded. For the first time, I started to believe it myself. The silence didn't last. I should have known my parents wouldn't let it go that easily. For a few days, things were quiet. No calls, no messages, no surprise appearances outside Leah's apartment. It felt too good to be real, and deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before something happened. My father wasn't the type to accept defiance. My mother wasn't the type to give up control. I had cut them off, but they weren't done with me yet. It started with my grandmother. I hadn't expected to hear from her, but when her name popped up on my phone, I hesitated before answering. She wasn't like my parents. She had never been outright cruel to me. She wasn't warm exactly, but she wasn't hateful. If she was calling, it wasn't just for small talk. I picked up, hello? A brief pause, then her voice came through, measured and calm. Nova! She said it smoothly, like she had no problem accepting my new name, but I knew better. She was only using it because she wanted something. I heard about what happened with your parents, she continued. Your mother is heartbroken. I clenched my jaw. She made her choice. Grandmother sighed. Did she? Or did you force her into it? My grip tightened around the phone. I didn't force her to do anything. You ran away, she said, like it was a simple fact. You blocked their numbers. You refused to even speak to your father. Because he doesn't speak, I snapped. He yells, he insults, he manipulates. I'm done with it. She was quiet for a moment, then said, your mother wants to see you. Of course she did. She wanted another chance to convince me, to guilt me, to pull me back in. Not happening, I said. Grandmother hummed thoughtfully, like she was considering her next move. She won't try to change your mind, if that's what you're worried about. She just wants to talk. I let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, I've heard that before. You owe her at least that much, she said, voice firm. She carried you for 9 months, raised you, provided for you, and now you're ready to throw all that away? My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to stay calm. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm just choosing myself for once. She wants to meet somewhere neutral, Grandmother pressed, not at home. A cafe, somewhere public. That was supposed to reassure me, I guessed. Somewhere public where she couldn't scream at me, couldn't lock me in my room, couldn't drag me back home. I should have said no. I knew better. But something about the way Grandmother spoke, the way she made it sound so reasonable, so small, made me hesitate. One conversation. One meeting. Maybe if I gave her that, she'd finally let me go? Fine, I said. 1 hour. That's it. She gave me the time and place. I hung up. Leah was less than thrilled when I told her. This is a bad idea, she said immediately. You know that, right? I know, I admitted. but I need to do this. Because a part of me still wanted to believe my mother could change, that she could accept this, that she could accept me. But I didn't say that. I just shrugged. Maybe it'll give me closure. Leah didn't look convinced, but she didn't try to stop me. You want me to come with you? I shook my head. I need to handle this on my own. The cafe was quiet when I arrived. My mother was already there, sitting by the window, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes scanning me like she was searching for something familiar, something she recognized. Nova, she said. I nodded, sitting across from her. You wanted to talk. So talk. She pursed her lips. You don't have to be so defensive. I do, actually. A sigh. She rubbed her temple, looking tired, worn down. I don't understand why you're doing this. I really don't. You don't have to understand, I said. You just have to respect it. She flinched like I had slapped her. I've always respected you. I let out a humorless laugh. You named me after a dead girl. You celebrated my name on her birthday. You let Dad treat me like garbage because I wasn't her. How is that respect? Tears welled in her eyes. I never meant for it to be like that. But it was. She swallowed hard. I never loved you any less than I loved her. Then why did I always feel like I was never enough? Silence stretched between us. She wiped at her eyes. I miss you. I clenched my fists under the table. You miss the version of me you controlled, the version who didn't fight back. That's not true, she said desperately. You're my daughter. Then act like it, I said. Let me go. She opened her mouth, then closed it, her fingers curled around her coffee cup, knuckles turning white. And then I felt it, the shift in the air. I glanced toward the door and saw him, my father. He had just walked in, his eyes immediately locking onto mine, cold, furious. My stomach dropped. I shot up from my seat. You said this was just you. My mother's face crumpled. I didn't know he'd come, I swear. Liar. I turned to leave, but my father was already moving. He grabbed my wrist, his grip tight, unyielding. You're coming home, he said. No, I yanked my arm, but he didn't let go. Let me go. Enough of this nonsense, he snapped. You're done with this phase. It's not a phase, I hissed, and I am done with you. His grip tightened, his face darkening. You don't get to decide that. Yes, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady, I do. People were staring now. The barista behind the counter looked unsure, like she wasn't sure if she should intervene. My mother reached for him. Please, just let her. Stay out of this, he growled. That was the moment I realized she had never been in control. Not really. It was always him. And now he was losing that control and he was unraveling. I looked him in the eyes and said, if you don't let me go, I will start screaming. His grip faltered, just enough. I ripped my arm free and bolted. I didn't stop running until I was blocks away. My chest was heaving, my wrist burning from his grip, my heart pounding. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking. I called Leah. She picked up instantly. No. My voice came out raw. You were right. Where are you? I looked around, trying to get my bearings. Somewhere on 3rd. My breath hitched. I can't go back. Stay put, I'm coming. I clutched my phone, trying to calm my breathing. I wasn't safe. Not yet. But I was free. Leah didn't ask questions when she picked me up. She didn't need to. She took one look at me, hair a mess, wrist red where my father had grabbed me, breath still coming too fast, and just unlocked the door. I slid into the passenger seat, pressing my forehead against the window, my body still tense, still braced for something worse. My father had let me go, but that didn't mean he was done. Neither of them were. The drive back to Laya's was quiet. She didn't try to fill the silence, didn't ask if I was okay. She knew I wasn't. When we got inside, she just grabbed a blanket, tossed it over me, and put a glass of water in front of me before sitting down across the room, waiting. Letting me come back to myself at my own pace. I took a slow sip of water, then another. My hands still shook when I set the glass down. I should have known, I muttered. Leah tilted her head. That they'd pull something? That my mom would lie to me. I clenched my fists. She always acts like she's the victim, like she's stuck between me and my dad, but she's never really been on my side. Leah nodded like she had already figured that out long before I had. So what now? I swallowed hard. I can't stay here forever. You can stay as long as you need. I know, I said, and I did. But this wasn't a real solution. This was a pause. My parents weren't just going to let me disappear. My father had already tried to drag me back once, and next time, it wouldn't be in a public cafe where I had a way out. He'd wait until I was alone. He'd wait until I was too tired, too cornered, too weak to fight him. I needed to disappear for real. I straightened, looking at Leah. I need to leave the city. She raised an eyebrow. Like? Permanently? For a while, at least, until they stop looking for me. I exhaled. If they ever do. Leah leaned forward, resting her arms on her knees. Where would you go? I had no idea. I had no real money, no job, nothing set up, just the certainty that staying meant getting pulled back into a life I refused to live anymore. Leah seemed to read the hesitation in my face. You could go to my aunt's place, she said. She lives a few towns over, near the coast. She rents out rooms sometimes. I bet she'd let you stay for cheap, at least for a while. It was something, a start. Would she be okay with that? I'll talk to her. Leah studied me. But Nova, if you do this, it's going to be a clean break. No going back. I don't want to go back. Leah's lips pressed together, but she nodded. Then let's make a plan. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I packed the essentials, clothes, what little cash I had, the documents I needed. I changed every password to my accounts, locked down my social media, wiped every trace of myself from places my parents could look. Leah's aunt agreed to let me stay, no questions asked. She had a spare room, no internet, and no interest in drama. Perfect. It still didn't feel real until the night before I was supposed to leave. Leah and I were sitting on the couch, the TV playing some show neither of us were paying attention to. I was staring at my phone, my finger hovering over the last thing I needed to do. Delete my mother's number? I had already blocked her, but this felt more final, like stepping off a ledge with no safety net. Once I did this, there was no more hesitation, no more lingering hope that she'd call one last time and say the words I had always wanted to hear. I wanted her to say she was sorry. I wanted her to say she should have fought for me instead of trying to keep me in a dead girl's place. I wanted her to say that she loved me, not some idea of who I was supposed to be. But she never would. Leah nudged me. You don't have to if you're not ready. Ready, I said, and then I pressed delete. The next morning, I left before sunrise. Leah drove me to the bus station. We didn't talk much. She just tapped her fingers on the wheel, glancing at me every now and then, like she was waiting for me to change my mind. I didn't. When we pulled up in front of the station, she sighed, turning to me. Text me when you get there. I will. And if you need anything? I know. She stared at me, like she wanted to say something else, then just huffed and pulled me into a tight hug. Take care of yourself, Nova. I squeezed her back. You too. Then I grabbed my bag, stepped out of the car, and didn't look back. The bus ride felt like shedding an old skin. With every mile that passed, I left more of my past behind. The girl my parents had tried to shape me into. The guilt, the fear, the weight of my father's hands on my wrist. The sound of my mother's voice, always asking me to be something I wasn't. By the time I arrived at Leah's aunt's place, the sun was high, the sea breeze sharp in the air, the house was small, the paint peeling, the garden overgrown. But it was safe. It was mine. Leah's aunt greeted me with a nod, handed me a key, and didn't ask any questions. I dropped my bag on the bed and sat down, letting out a long, slow breath. For the first time in my life, no one knew where I was unless I wanted them to. For the first time, I was free. The first few weeks in the new town felt like being a ghost. No one knew me, no one expected anything from me. I could walk down the street without the weight of my past pressing on my back. There were no familiar faces, no whispers about my name, no chance of turning a corner and seeing my parents waiting for me. I was invisible, and for the first time in my life, I liked it. Leah's Aunt Ruth wasn't the kind of person who pried. She gave me a room, let me stay for cheap, and only asked that I help out with chores when I could. That was it. No questions about why I left, no judgment about the fact that I barely spoke at first. She didn't even bat an eye when I told her my name was Nova. She just nodded and said, "All right then, Nova, dinner's at 6. I spent my first few days adjusting. The town was smaller than I was used to, quieter. Ruth's house was close to the shore, and I found myself walking there every evening, letting the ocean drown out my thoughts. It helped. I still woke up some mornings with panic gripping my chest, still checked over my shoulder in case my father had somehow found me. But the longer I stayed, the more that fear faded. They didn't know where I was. They didn't have control over me anymore. It wasn't until the second week that I got my first real sign that they hadn't given up. I was in town picking up a few groceries for Ruth when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You can't run forever." I stopped cold in the middle of the aisle, my fingers tightening around my phone. My heart slammed against my ribs, the words blurring for a second as panic surged through me. It had to be my father. I had blocked him, blocked my mother, but he must have found another way to reach me. I forced myself to breathe. Maybe it wasn't them. Maybe it was some random spam message. But deep down, I already knew. I shoved the phone into my pocket and finished my shopping as quickly as possible, my pulse hammering in my ears. When I got back to Ruth's, I locked the door behind me, my hands still shaking. I didn't tell her about the message. I didn't tell Leah either. Part of me wanted to believe it didn't mean anything, that it was just my father trying to scare me into coming back, but another part of me knew better. A few days later, another message came. "You're still ours." I deleted it immediately, my stomach twisting. They weren't going to stop. I started being more careful. I stayed off social media, avoided talking to strangers, made sure to always keep my phone on silent in case they tried calling from a new number. I knew they couldn't track me, my accounts were locked, my location was off, but paranoia started creeping back in. Then, one evening, Ruth found me sitting on the porch staring blankly at my phone. She sat down beside me, lighting a cigarette, and exhaled a slow stream of smoke. "You waiting for someone to show up?" I blinked at her. "What?" "You've been on edge," she said simply. "Keep looking over your shoulder, checking your phone like it's about to explode." She took another drag. "Someone bothering you?" I hesitated. I hadn't told her anything about my parents, about why I left, but Ruth wasn't stupid. She had let me come here without asking questions, but that didn't mean she didn't notice things. I exhaled. "They won't leave me alone." She nodded, like she had been expecting that. "Parents." I swallowed hard. "Yeah." She tapped her cigarette against the railing. "You need me to take care of it?" I let out a breathless, almost disbelieving laugh. "What, like have them taken out?" Ruth smirked. "Not quite, but I know how to make people disappear. Legally." I stared at her. "How?" She flicked her cigarette into the ashtray. "We change everything." The next morning, she drove me to a friend of hers, an old woman who worked in legal services. Within an hour, she had walked me through everything. How to set up a P.O. box so no one could track my mail. How to get a new phone plan under a different name. How to make sure my records weren't accessible to anyone but me. Ruth paid for everything. I didn't ask why. That night, I sat in my room, staring at my phone one last time before switching it off permanently. There was one more message from an unknown number sent earlier that day. "You will always be part of this family." I stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it. Then I powered off my phone and never turned it back on. I wasn't running anymore. I was erasing them first. Months passed. The messages stopped. The fear faded. I became someone new. At first, I kept expecting them to show up. Every time I walked through town, I braced myself for the sight of my father's car, for my mother's voice calling after me. I kept my head down, avoided eye contact, checked over my shoulder even when I knew there was no reason to. Some nights I dreamed about them. I would wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I had made a mistake, that I had left something unfinished. But the sun would rise and the town would still be quiet and I would still be here, alive, free. Ruth helped me build something resembling a life. She got me a job at a small diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where people didn't ask too many questions. I worked morning shifts, pouring coffee for regulars who only knew me as Nova, the quiet girl who never talked about her past. I learned their names, their orders, the way they took their coffee. I smiled when they made small talk, laughed at their bad jokes. No one asked where I came from, and I never offered. The job was simple, repetitive. I liked that about it. The clang of dishes, the hiss of the coffee machine, the quiet hum of conversation, it grounded me. I got used to the routine of it, waking up early, walking to work as the sun rose over the ocean, feeling the cold morning air on my face. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Evenings were my favorite. After my shift, I would take the long way home, walking along the shore, my shoes in one hand, my feet sinking into the wet sand. The town felt different at dusk, softer. I would sit on the beach and watch the waves, letting the steady rhythm calm the last of my nerves. The anxiety never fully left me, but it grew quieter. Some nights I even let myself believe it was gone. One afternoon, I was wiping down a table when I heard it. My old name. I froze. It was just one word, but it hit me like a fist to the stomach. The rag in my hand slipped, falling onto the table. My breath caught in my throat. I turned slowly, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might be sick. A woman stood near the counter, studying me. She looked vaguely familiar, like someone I had seen in passing years ago, maybe a friend of my mother's. She frowned slightly. "Sorry," she said. "I thought you were someone else." I forced myself to breathe. "You are..." She gave me one last curious glance, then turned away. I watched her go, my pulse still racing. It wasn't them. It wasn't a trap, it was just a stranger, someone who had made a mistake. But it didn't matter, she had said that name, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel anything, no pull, no guilt, no hesitation. I wasn't that person anymore, I never had been. Later that night, I sat on the beach, the waves crashing in the distance, my bare feet buried in the sand. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Leah, checking in as always. "How's the quiet life treating you? Miss me yet?" I smiled as I read her message, something sarcastic about missing me, about how things were boring without my dramatic main character energy. I told her I missed her too. "I still can't believe you did it," she wrote after a moment. "You really just started over." I hesitated before replying. "Yeah, I did." I looked up at the sky, the stars scattered above me, the ocean stretching endlessly before me. I thought about my parents, about their anger, their control, the way they had tried so hard to mold me into something I wasn't. Maybe they still thought I would come back someday, that this was just another rebellion, that I would eventually crawl home and apologize. But I wouldn't. I would never go back. For the first time in my life, I was exactly who I was meant to be.